Hi, Jenny. Thanks so much for taking time to join us for the WIDI blog series.
Oh, it's great to be with you, Micaela.
So, look, I want to start this interview with you, conversation with you, by acknowledging that we're both meeting on Aboriginal land and pay my respects to our First Nations people. Acknowledge that we have a great deal to learn from them, and we have a great deal of thought to go into the way we deliver services to respond to the issues that they are facing as a result of colonisation, and acknowledge that these lands have never been ceded. And really think about what we have to learn from their leadership, because what I'm interested to talk to you, Jenny, about is bit about your leadership journey and your thoughts about leadership. You've had more than 25 years in management and leadership roles across the community sector, in policy roles, direct service delivery roles, in government, and now as the CEO of the Council to Homeless Persons. You've been there since 2011, yeah? And you've got significant experience as a leader on boards as well. And I know you're thinking a lot about leadership in the sector. We've been talking about that. Jenny, I think one of the things as we think about how we build the leadership that we need for the sector for the future, it's becoming way more complex, the community services sector. And we don't have a good tradition of developing up the leaders, of succession planning, of thinking about, how do we build pathways to support people to develop the skills and capabilities and experience they need to do complex roles like the ones that you've been in. In understanding the trajectory into leadership, I'm curious about your leadership journey. So what your experience has been, how did you move from being a family therapist, direct practitioner into leadership roles, and what was the triggers, and what are some of your ideas about those pathways?
Well, thanks, Micaela. And I agree with you that, collectively we've got to do more, I think, to create opportunities in the community sector. And certainly that's the case for specialist homelessness sector, for us to more formally build the leadership capability that we have. I mean, people get there, but I'm not sure that we help them as much as we could. We've just introduced team leadership training in our homelessness sector, and I'm hoping that's just the start of things to come, and obviously looking to piggyback on what the work that WIDI is doing as much as possible. But it's funny how things happen. I would never have started my career thinking that I would be in any sort of leadership position. I wanted to be some sort of therapist, and I went off to do honours psychology for a few years, but they mainly train you how to review peer refereed journal articles, I think. So look, I got quite good at that, but that wasn't really doing it for me. So look, I went to social work, and that was a wonderful thing, and I think was the start of the making of me, because it took me from a reasonably individualised view of the world to the beginnings of a structural analysis of how to understand things. And I was very fortunate to have some more mature colleagues in my social work course who basically slapped me around a bit and told me I was full of rubbish ideas, and started to train me in a way that I will always be grateful. But when I started, I was a caseworker. I worked in our mental health services in our old psychiatric hospitals, community mental health, and then went to Bouverie fairly early, looking for, again, some more training in formal training in how to do all that. And again, I learnt so much doing that family therapy training that I use every day in working with groups of people, which is what we do all the time, and able to tolerate differences of view amongst groups of people. And I worked at Bouverie and taught there for a number of years as well. And then I went off to a training unit with the closure of some of the psychiatric hospitals, training staff in that transition before I took my first management role in community mental health. And I think at that point, my friends had been encouraging me to go into leadership, but I still didn't see myself that way. But at a certain point, after having been led and managed for a long time, I had that sort of feeling of just get out of the way and let me have a go. And it wasn't anything more sophisticated than that. So I started out managing the transition from a sort of outpatient clinic at a psychiatric hospital to a community mental health service. I then became CEO of a community health service out in the West. I went into the department for 4 years, which for people working in the public sector, I'd highly recommend having that experience of how government works. Again, it's useful in partnering with government every day to understand the incredible constraints within which they manage to get an enormous amount done. And then, in and around that, I managed a number of clinical mental health services in large hospitals and worked within those large bureaucracies. And just before coming to CHP, I was General Manager of Medical Services at St V's, but, within that, a sort of a mixture of acute services, but, mental health, alcohol and drugs, corrections, those sorts of things. So it's been a journey, and I have had a wonderful decade at CHP, and sort of wish I'd come to the community sector earlier. And peak role is, a particular opportunity. Small organisations, one moment you can be speaking to a state or federal minister, and the other you can be dealing with whether the front door lock on the office building is going to work or not. So it can make for a very interesting range of tasks within your day.
Jenny, it's not an unusual story, what you're talking about, that pathway, not planned, orchestrated, not necessarily well supported by other people, but a really valuable breadth of experience from a range of different stakeholders' perspectives. I think that's really critical in terms of, I think the sector is very lucky to have you in the leadership role that you're in. I think that you bring a pragmatism and understanding of how to make things happen that is a really good combination, and commitment and passion to what you do, which is also very clear from the trajectory that you've had. That's very, very, very impressive and necessary in leadership roles. So we'll talk more about that, Jenny, because I think that might be a task for next year, to have a bit of a think about how do we help make some of those, create those pathways and support them for people, because the work of the sector is becoming much more complex and requires that complex stakeholder management that I think you do so well. And it's clear from what you've talked about the different experience you've had, that you've got very good at working with a whole range of different people is part of it.
Well, that's very lovely of you, but I love it. I love working with people, but I think to understand that, in a way, one of my friends used to say, where you stand depends on where you sit, and everybody is trying to do their best. So to understand that life, it isn't a battle. People aren't trying to withhold resources from our shared endeavours. It's about how do we all try and get around the barriers and make the system work to get the outcome for the people who need our support, for the people who are all trying to help. And we've all got a role to play, and we've all got our own set of constraints, whether we're in government, in service delivery, or whether we're the people who are hoping to receive the services that we're trying to offer in the way that they should, have some control over how that's offered.
Yeah, I think that's a lovely phrase. Where you stand depends on how you say it again.
Well, it's really depends on where you sit, but it's really that we do all have different perspectives, and there's not much we can do about them. We do best, I think, if we try and understand the constraints and opportunities of each stakeholder and try and help each other overcome those constraints and barriers, and seize those opportunities together. I don't think there's anything more fun than when you're working with someone in the public service and the sort of, if you like, the gates open, the waters part, and you can all see that you can actually get the policy outcome that, we all know that people who use our services have told us that's what they want, that's how they want it, and you can actually make that improvement and boom, you go. But it's not so often that those waters part in very easily. Often what we're doing is incremental gains over time. I think working in human services, coming to be able to recognise and celebrate small wins. I've always been, someone to rush around the office and click my heels a little bit with a small win, a little bit of funding for this, or a good result, with something, because, we have to. It's usually incremental. And if it's a big change, then often we're experiencing a fair bit of pain with it as well. So, I don't mind the small wins.
No, absolutely agree. Which is a nice segue into my next question. We're going into a big year. We've been saying that every year for the last few years, but we're going to have elections at a state and federal level next year in a number of jurisdictions, state elections, and we are in a very transitional point in history when there are some opportunities for those gateways to open and the waters to part if we are able to influence that well. What are you thinking about as a leader about how to prepare for what's to come next year?
Well, it is a responsibility, Micaela, and as you talk about it, my shoulders are starting to, because it is important. I think in homelessness, it's hard to speak about the next year without speaking about the last year or two. We have seen a time where our sector around the country and in Victoria in particular has spent a lot of time getting people in and out of hotels to keep them and our community safe. And that has been a huge effort, and it has been great for everybody when people are going into hotels, and it's been awful for everybody when people have had to be asked to leave hotels, and our sector's exhausted, and it's been a very administratively exhausting effort for our sector. We also have to recognise that our state government has stepped up to the plate, and we've had the 1.3 billion big build. So that's 4 years of social housing, 12,000 units, of which 9,300 will be social housing. We've got 1,845 homeless to home housing and support package. We've just had another 250 packages for families announced as well. So that's all being implemented in a big rush, as is always the way. It's a mix of wanting to respond to the needs of the people that are to be the recipients of that relative good fortune, but it's also, the way governments operate. And some of this work really isn't well suited to being done in a rush. And so I think we've now got the challenge before us to try and consolidate that and I think deal with some of the consequences of doing it very quickly. And the other thing is, as you and I have talked about many times, is that, you know, working in homelessness is the place to be. But despite it being the place to be, it is the sector that probably has the lowest funding rate of anywhere in our community sector, and that, you know, translates into what people get paid. And so all this additional work and opportunity has put enormous pressure on our workforce, and we are really showing the cracks, and it's really showing that you know, a sector that has been devoted and very stable but not grown very much in a great deal of time is going through some considerable growing pains, and that there's a great deal of work in terms of capacity building that needs to be done. And as you know, that's where my mind has been over the last year or two, about trying to put the building blocks in place in partnership with government to start to be able to do that infrastructure work that would have been lovely if it was done a decade ago. But we need to crack on and get that done now. And so thinking strategically for the sector, we do need to do the work that is going to open up a pipeline of quality staffing to augment the wonderful, wonderful people we have working in our sector as we grow and respond to that. And so as the peak body, we're having to think about how we tweak the way we're organised to be best positioned to both create and seize those opportunities. The other dimension is, I mean, the two key ingredients in ending homelessness are the Centrelink income and I mean, and the level of social housing. And while the Victorian government has, you know, really come to the party, stepped up to the plate, we haven't seen that from the federal government. And so we really need to, you know, continue to bang on about the federal government has a role to play in that as we move towards the federal election as well. Labor's got a policy around a future fund and interest from that, paying for a stream of social housing over time. The Greens have the sorts of policies that will, you know, with social housing and the support that people need to keep that housing, that would really start to end homelessness in our community. So we've still got the work to do to try and encourage the current government to have some sort of platform in the social housing space. The other thing is that when we look at the number of people who came to our homelessness services during the pandemic, you can see that when the Centrelink income was close to doubled, that there was a very considerable drop-off in the numbers of people needing homelessness services. And as that Centrelink income was tapered back, you know, over time to that pretty much the previous level, plus a cup of coffee, the numbers went back up again. So what we know intuitively, what we see in our services every day, the data is now supporting that you cannot expect people to be able to put a roof over their head with an inadequate income. So we will keep toiling, and we will have to keep a weather eye to all of those developments, and we would hope that the Victorian government will sustain its interest in continuing the tremendous efforts that they've made over the 4-year period into the 10-year plan that's currently under development, that would see this not just be a one-off effort, but a stream, an ongoing pipeline of social housing that will keep more vulnerable Victorians safe with a roof over their head.
It's a both a complex and a pretty simple agenda. Having the houses, the workforce, the income for people so that they're not in poverty, and what we can do together to collaborate on those things, which I'm really looking forward to working with you on next year, Jenny, and the bits that the workforce that WIDI can do to support the efforts that you and the sector are doing. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thanks, Micaela. WIDI's work's going to be crucial, I think, to addressing so many of these issues. It's been lovely speaking with you as always.
Thanks.